Hey there, CS210 students. So in this recording, we're going to go to the details of file input and output. So in your previous programming classes, you should have worked with reading in input from files and writing output to them. So the ideas are the same regardless of programming language. We're just going to see how that works here in C++. So we're going to kind of jump down here. They provide us some code here. So first thing that we need to have is a mechanism to read in input from a file. And so you can see that we have a IF stream type, and they've called it NFS. So input file stream, that is what is used to read in data from a simple text file. You will need an include statement, so we have to include fstream for this to work. And so the idea here is we're going to use this input file stream to read in data from a simple text file. So this little simple text file might have the values 5 and 10. Easy. We're going to have a couple variables to represent those values. Coming down here, so this idea isn't common to reading in files, but this right here is. We have to read in the name of the file. So in this case, numfile.txt, this has to be in your projects folder where the C++ file exists. If it's not, then you'd have to give it the full path to where that file exists. And for our purposes, I don't want you doing that. I want this file to be in the same directory as the C++ file. And I'll show you all that here in a second. So we have an input file stream reference. We then open it. And if we can't open it, so we have an is open that we can check. So if it doesn't open, then we know that we failed. In all likelihood, the text file didn't exist. And so we're going to display an error and we're going to exit out of here. Otherwise, that means it was opened, so we're good to go. So we can read the text file. And just like in Java, I can use the same tools to read an input. So back in Java land, you were using a scanner. Here, you can see that we are using the extraction operator, just like when we're reading an input from the console. So we're going to read in. So this reads in a first line of text. Got it? This reads in the next line of text. So this would read in 5 to file num1, 10 to file num2, and that's all this does right here. Okay, so this is really simple. You're not going to do this in our assignment. Okay, don't do this in our assignment. We'll talk here in a second how this really should be handled. Then we then close the input stream. So same process in any language. I have to have a mechanism to read input. We open it, giving it the name of the text file. I check if it's open, read my data, and then we close it. And so then they're just doing down here where, file num1 and file num2 would contain 5 and 10. Okay, I'm going to just skip over that part. Coming down here, now what we want to do is we have a text file. Again, it just has integers in it. But instead of just reading in 2 of the integers, we're going to read in all of the contents of this text file. So I've gone ahead and copied this code right here. So I've copied all this code and I have pasted it over in a Visual Studio project. So right now, I don't have a file called myfile.txt. So when I run this is going to error out, and I'm going to get this message, could not open file. Right there it is, could not open it because the file doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and add the file to our project. So I'm going to right click my source files, add new item, and we're going to call it myfile.txt. This has to match exactly the naming convention over here. Great, and we'll just go ahead and come over here and we'll copy and paste these values, and there they are. I'm going to save all. Real big thing to note here, do not have any blank spaces at the end. If there's a blank space at the end, it's going to read it. We don't want that to happen. So we only have lines of text for each valid piece of information, okay? All right, so now let's come back over here and let's see how we read a file. Let me rephrase it. Let's look at the implementation they gave us to read the file. I still need an input stream, still need to have my include statement. This is just a nice to have that I'm going to open up the text file. We open it, we check if it's open. So all the same, we're going to read and print numbers here. Okay. Now here's where they do it a little bit different. They're going to read in the first line and check if it failed. I'm not a big fan of this. So I'm going to get rid of this. So we're going to comment that out. We're not going to do that. And where it has fail here, I'm going to read using the EOF. EOF is short for end of file. So while I have not reached the end of the file, what I want to do is read in the input. So we're going to switch up the order here, and we're going to read in our input. Remember, I used the same extraction operator just like when we were reading an input from the console. And so this is going to use the input stream and then save the value to the variable file num. And then we're just going to print it out as it runs. So they have a check if we haven't reached the end of the file. We already know that's going to work, so we can get rid of that. Actually, I'll just comment that out as well. So again, I'm going to not worry about that. And then we are going to close that resource. So now let's see what happens. I'm going to put a breakpoint in here so we can kind of step through the code and see what we're getting here. So, all right, so we're right here, so we can do a step over. So I'm able to read the file, and first thing that it reads in is the number 111. Great. That is the first value that's in our text file. Okay. They go 111, 222, and so forth. And so now it's going to print it out. Yep, got it. So now it's going to read the next value, print it out. We got 222 and so forth. So this is going to read each value and print it out to the console. Okay. All right. Fantastic. Oh, by the way, let's take this a step further. So instead of just printing this out here, what I would prefer you do, especially for your assignment that you have to do, is that we're going to save these values to a vector. So let's create a vector. Oh, I guess I'll do it when I know that the file's open. Yeah, we'll do it right here. So vector type integer, my numbers, or we'll just call it numbers. Great, and we need to have an import. So import that, and great. So now I've got a vector I can read values into. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to do a numbers dot push back the number that got read in right there. And I'm going to put a breakpoint on the end here. So as I'm looping, we're going to save the values to a vector. And then I've read in the data that's going to be accessible throughout the lifetime of this application. So let's go ahead and run it this time. Cross your fingers. Great. So I went through this loop. I definitely read them and printed them out. So if I hover over numbers, I can see that it's got the values that I just read in. Fantastic. So we are all good. That has read in our input and saved it to a vector. All right, so let's jump back into the zyBooks. So again, they give us some details. I'm not a big fan of this implementation here. You need to use this implementation when you're reading in the input. And don't care about that stuff. And so here is something that's going to be kind of relevant to what your assignment has. We could have a file that is reading in both a string and a integer. You can see that they're using getLine to do that. What we could do is just read in very similar, where they read in the, it would look something like this, in file, input file stream, read in the username. Again, that's not been initialized, but that's okay. So I would read in the username and then it would read in the file num afterwards. Okay, so that would kind of be a better way to handle it. But you could use getLine. The only time you really need to use getLine is when your input has a space in it. So if we had any spaces in those lines, then you would need to use a getLine. But for your homework assignment, that's not the case. So you can just simply use the extraction operator. Keep in mind, you have to know that the format of the text files, what it is, and then you have a contract that you abide by where you're reading in the values according to the contract. Okay. Let's take a look at, I think I already took care of everything in here. Yeah, so in 7.2, if you're reading in this text right here, you have to use getLine because it's got a space in there. Otherwise, it's just going to read this piece. If you do the extraction operator like this right here, you're just going to read in the first part, and then it's going to be kind of out of sync because the contract here is it is a team name, which could include a space, and then followed by, here you can see they read in the number of wins, then the number of losses. Again, they're knowing that there's a space in between there so they can use the extraction operator. Okay, so again, our implementation for our homework is going to be a little bit different. We'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, in section 7.3, we're going to switch gears and talk about writing to a file. Same mechanism, just like in your other programming classes. You need something that will be able to output to a file. So in C++, it's an output file stream reference. So we have OFStream. And again, we have to have an include statement. So when we include fstream, we get that. We have to open the file that we want to output to. Same rules apply. This right here, this file, is going to get created in the root directory of our project where the C++ file is. Otherwise, if I put a path to the file, that's where it will get written. Don't do that for your homework assignment because you might put something like C drive, your name, / CS210, and I am not going to have that on my machine. So I don't want that to get created, so don't do that. Just simply use the names of the files. So we have our reference to our output file stream. We open it. If we can open it, great. Otherwise, we're going to print out an error message and exit out. Otherwise, we use the insertion operator, just like printing to the console, to print output. So this would write hello. And then something that new programmers often forget is you need an end L to put the next line on the new line down. So this is just like writing to the console. So this will write hello, put a new line. This will write 1, 2, 3, put a new line, and so forth. If we didn't put these end L's here, we would get hello and then 1 right after it, a 2 and a 3. In fact, let's just come down here and let's take a look at that in action. So again, I copied and pasted that code. So this is going to create myoutfile.txt right in here, and let's see what it does. Okay, great. So closing myfile.txt. Didn't get an error message right here, so we got through this okay. So right-click this, and I know there's a refresh around here somewhere. We might have to add a reference to it. Let me just show you in a project. So here's where that files project is in my Windows Explorer. I'm going to go inside files, and you can see right here, here's the myfile.txt that we added to the project earlier. Here is the out file, and I just need to add existing item, myoutfile.txt, and now it's in here. And it should have hello and 1, 2, 3 in it. Fantastic. Let's get rid of these end L's. So remember I said if I get rid of these, then it's just going to print everything in a bunch. So let's run that. And let's go take a look at that file. And just as I promised, you can see that it's got everything in a bunch. Oh, by the way, when we just simply open a file like this, we are completely overriding whatever was in the file before. There are ways to open using append, where you add to the end of the file. You can see that there are 6 overloads. There's multiple ways of opening a file. That's kind of beyond the scope of our class. We're not going to worry about it for right now. So again, by putting the end else there, that would make our output all end up on a new line. And oh, by the way, let's run this. So if I look at my out file, you can see that we have an empty line on the end. That could be a problem if we are printing the output that'll eventually get read back in. So remember, when we're reading in our values, we don't want a blank line on the end. So maybe I don't want to print an end L for the very last one. So I come in here, and if this were input getting read in, then I don't potentially write the end L there. All right, so let's wrap up one thing from before. So remember, we've got a vector that has numbers in it. What if we wanted to write those values to an output file? Well, pretty easy. Let's just reuse our output stream here. We know that it's going to be open. And instead of just writing these 2 lines here, let's comment those out. Let's loop through the vector. So while we called it numbers. Let's see here. How do I want to do this? Let me do a for loop. Hang on one second. All right, so don't know why I was thinking I was going to do a while loop here. Let's write a for loop. So int I for I equals 0, I less than our numbers dot size. So we've got that size attribute, I plus plus. So we are going to loop through our vector, and all we're going to do to write to the output is go output stream, the insertion operator, and I'm going to go get numbers dot at position I. So that's going to output our values to the file. And let's do an end L here. So for our purposes, for our assignment, it's okay to have a blank line at the end. So cross your fingers, let's run this. So our myoutfile.txt should have the same values. And so here we are, and indeed they do. So we are all good with that, okay? So the ideas of reading in input to from a file and then outputting values from a file, again, pretty straightforward. Hopefully it's familiar to you from your previous programming languages. All right, let's transition and let me get the lab assignment or the assignment pulled up, and let's talk about that. So hang on one second. Okay, so I've got the files details here. So let's go take a look at what we have here. So we are reading in values from this Fahrenheit temperature.txt file. So you can click it, you can copy these values right here, Control C, and then start up your new project. Just like I showed you, add new file, and then just paste in these values right here, okay? So I would come into my file and I would paste those in right there, or it should be called Fahrenheit.txt. So what we want to do is we want to read in the values from the file. Now, just because it says 6 different cities in here, you need to read it as I've shown you in the implementation here, where we're going to read until we get to the end of the file. By contract, you can assume that it's going to be a city name with just one word, a space, and then the Fahrenheit temperature for that city right there. So you can use the extraction operator, read to a string, read to an integer. So we're going to read in the input of this data. So we're going to use something very similar to what we did right here. Okay, we're going to read in that input. Now, what I want you to do, because eventually we have to output this data to a file, what I want you to do is I want you to read in the temperatures to a vector and read in the city names to a separate vector. So you can just run parallel vectors for this. If you wanted to create a class and encapsulate the information, that's fine. But also just using parallel vectors, that would be fine as well. So we're gonna have a vector for the temperatures and a vector for the city names. So read that information in. Then we're going to write code to output the temperatures in Celsius. So this should have the city name and the Celsius temperature in there. And so you have a formula that you can use. If you want to create a method for it, you can. If you want to, as you are performing the output operation, which is going to be just like this right here. Okay, so your vectors, either one, they're going to have the exact same size, so you can pick whichever one you want, doesn't matter. And then we're going to write out the city name and the temperature. Okay, so we write out the city name and temperature from the vector. Again, we're not going to loop through, read the contents of the file, and write to the output file. If you do that, you're going to get dinged on the rubric. I will ding it right here on writing data needs improvement. I'm going to ding that, okay? It should be done separately. Oh, by the way, keep in mind that we are performing this calculation right here. So let me get a calculator. And so we have, as an example, we have 47. So this goes like this, 47 minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. So we should have output something to this effect right here. I'm not worried about how many values it rounds to, but this is 8.3 repeating, just however many default it prints out, okay? So if you have 8, you have a mistake. So make sure that this is handled properly in your code and in your calculations, okay? All right, so that is going to wrap up this recording. As always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out.